preserving of the centuries-old Sphinx from the ever-engulfing sands of the desert is an endless job. And today, on the eve of the Egyptian tourist season, hundreds of extra natives, mainly girls, are busily engaged in carrying away hundreds of tons of sand in kufas, or baskets in loads of 20 pounds. Of course, it isn't quite impossible to use machinery, and weeks of work can be wiped out in an hour's sandstorm. Perhaps that accounts for the inscrutable smile of the Sphinx.
The air is soft and warm. We've just started a 600-mile river journey that you could either call a pilgrimage or a post-mortem on time long past. We're passing palm trees and mud hut villages, sugar plantations, and a panorama that hasn't changed in any of its essentials in 5,000 years. Caesar would have recognized that helmsman's features. Mark Antony would have seen hundreds of such like feluccas carrying sugarcane and cotton, for we're navigating the world's most historic river. The Nile, with its rich silt and yearly flooding, carved the start of Western culture out of the desert, and the ancient kings who grew rich on the gifts of the Nile, in turn, carved massive memorials out of its rose-tinted stone. Luxor Temple, where Ramesses left his huge monument to dwarf us and the centuries to near insignificance. This was Thebes, imperial city of the pharaohs for 1,000 years. In such great temples, the sun god, Amun-Ra, was worshipped for longer than the whole of our Christian epoch. In fact, you'll find on this journey up the Nile, the sun still has its dedicated devotees. For centuries, tomb robbers scoured the Nile Valley, rifling the sepulchres, and in the Middle Ages, even grinding mummies to a powder that was sold as medicine. And waves of religious fanatics systematically defaced whatever ancient monuments they came across to blot out the idolatry of these pre-Christian beliefs. The wonder is that anything so unspoilt as this temple at Edfu could escape their destructive zeal. The early Coptic Christians would have obliterated Horus the hawk, son of Osiris, the god of the dead, if they'd unearthed this ancient place. But many of the treasures of the Nile lay undiscovered until the turn of the last century, when Egyptology really began. Now, passengers on the riverboat can recapture the whole grandeur in easy stages and see from vivid records how the pharaohs lived. You can go on from here to where the Nile cascades through a great cataract and farther in a 10-day scheduled trip which once only the leisured few could enjoy. This is the winter scene on the great, wide, winding waterway after the June floods have run riot and the dam sluice gates have been shut to regulate the flow. There's a scurrying aboard, for this is the season when the steamer can edge in and disembark visitors on the clay bank here at Kamombo, so they can see one of the last temples of the Upper Nile that isn't threatened with flooding when the big new dam is built just upriver at Aswan. Here you can see carvings and fine friezes which the warrior kings had ordered in their honor. In some places they're colored white from lime, blue from azurite, and red from the iron in the surrounding rocks. Nubia, and now the backcloth is empty and scrubland. Here's the dry land that will be buried deep underwater, along with a score of temples ages older than Methuselah. These sphinxes at Wadi el-Sebar, which became water animals when the first dam was built, will be moved, together with the temple, when the new, bigger one is there. But there are others which may disappear and disintegrate. It matters perhaps little that such trim villages will crumble deep below the waterline of the world's biggest man-made lake. The whole of Egypt will prosper from the power and the fertility that the new dam will hold in store. 3 new palm trees will grow for every one that is drowned. The ducks will find new reeds to rest in. It matters little if a few tombs and temples are lost in the flood. Their hieroglyphics and wall pictures have been read and recorded, and their contribution to history has been made. But there is one threatened place whose loss would leave the world impoverished. You reach it, if you can contrive to do so, at sunrise. Abu Simbel. The rock temple, built, again by the pharaoh Ramesses, was carved out of the sandstone face of the cliffs. This temple was built so that the rising sun would shine direct into the inner sanctuary of the gods and light the face of the pharaoh Ramesses once a year. By the side of the towering pharaoh, even his favorite queen was of small significance, not reaching much more stature than the hordes of Asiatic prisoners depicted under his mighty feet. The two Nile gods bind the symbolic plants of Upper and Lower Egypt, united by this proud warrior, the achievement which prompted Ramesses to carve the facade of this temple out of a 250-foot hillside, with those seated figures of him more than 12 times larger than life. Saving it calls for a project greater still. One costly plan is to cut it loose from the cliff and inch it onto a series of concrete slabs, together with Queen Nefertari's own boudoir temple alongside. Look at the young queen, and it's hard to realize all this was built as long before Christ as St. Paul's Cathedral was built after him. So fresh and young and modern does this girl queen look. The river of Egypt truly has many hidden secrets. So look now with wonderment at Abu Simbel, lest any hope of saving it is abandoned, and in a few years these treasures too are hidden irrevocably by the waters of the Nile.
Colossus of Rhodes, the Pharaohs of Alexandria, the Mausoleum of Halicarnassus, the Statue of Jupiter, Diana's Temple, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, and the Pyramids of Egypt. Still studying, we are reminded that of the 7 wonders known to the ancients that we have just mentioned, the pyramids alone are left. The most famous of these age-old relics are at Gizeh, near Memphis, west of the Nile, and the biggest among them is the tomb of Khufu, a king of the 4th dynasty. The sides of the Great Pyramid face exactly north, south, east, and west, a very useful thing to bear in mind if you happen to be lost in the neighborhood. But even more striking is the height, 451 feet, higher than the Dome of St. Paul's. The base is as long as the terrace of the Houses of Parliament, and here are some other comparisons. It's recorded that the pyramids took millions of men 30 years to build, and it originally consisted of over 2 million limestone and granite blocks weighing about 6 million tons. These huge stones were polished and fitted with the accuracy of a watch, and it's calculated that if placed end to end, they'd stretch from Great Britain to Newfoundland. Now let's examine the pyramid in greater detail. The entrance and descending gallery were in a direct line with the North Star, and 2 apartments were built at the end of it. There were air passages both sides of the pyramid and a well at the bottom. Going back to the entrance, the diagram shows how the North Star was visible from the gallery. The floor of the passage was flooded with water, which reflected the light of the star up the corresponding passage in this way. History records that 5,000 years ago, the sides were smooth and colored with red, green, black, and white mosaic. More extraordinary still, the pyramid had a large gilt spike on the top called the light. It was decorated with silver and represented Anubis, the jackal. Today, the Great Pyramid is the mecca of world travelers, and big businessmen have had strange ideas about it. Here's one of them.
Neue Ausgrabungen in Ägypten brachten jahrtausendealte Schätze der Pharaonen ans Tageslicht. Eine unbekannte Sphinx, das rätselvolle Symbol des ägyptischen Sonnengottes, fand man an der Tempelstraße zwischen Karnak und Luxor am Nil. Die Mumie eines Priesters, 4000 Jahre alt, wird aus einem freigelegten Grabgewölbe hervorgebracht. Fantastische Kunstgegenstände liegen neben den toten Zeugen des uralten Kulturreiches und füllen nun die Glasvitrinen des Museums in Kairo. Ein Parfumbehälter aus Alabaster 1300 Jahre vor Christus hergestellt. Der goldene Thron des Knabenkönigs Tutankamon. Der Sarkophag des Königs Tut. Die goldene Hülle zeigt künstlerisch vollendete Darstellungen der alten Götter des Niltales. Unermessliche Werte, sagenhafte Schätze kommen aus den Grabmälern der 14 Pharaonen. Fremdartige Schönheit und noch immer geheimnisvolle Bedeutung vereinen sich in diesen Zeugen aus frühester Kulturgeschichte. Die Gesichtsmaske des Königs Tut. Lapislazuli schmückt das Haupt des einstigen Herrschers vom Nil.
Near Egypt's Valley of the Kings lies the temple of Queen Hatshepsut, one of many fabulous monuments to the glory of the ancient pharaohs, which Egyptian archaeologists have been exploring for more treasures of the past. And although excavations have been going on in Egypt for many years, this is something new. For the first time, Egyptian experts are in charge of the work. All the great discoveries so far have been made under British or American supervision. Now Egypt is digging up her own history. Some things have not changed since the pharaohs ruled, but alongside the eternal peasant, trained scientists are beginning to fill the posts once occupied by foreigners. Tourists are shown the recently uncovered avenue of sphinxes. This rock and roll method is how the pyramids were built, and how the huge stones of the temple city of Luxor were dragged into place. Although these vast colonnades are empty and silent, visitors say that as you walk among them, you cannot escape the feeling that you have slipped back 40 centuries to the birth of civilization. So vivid and alive are these giants from the dawn of man. The world owes much to Egypt, for here many of the arts and sciences were born. Now Egypt herself is taking up the task of unraveling the past. But she in turn must thank the great archaeologists of the West who showed her the way.
Silence, as the earth god Get speaks to a dead pharaoh. My beloved son, thy nobility is perfect, King Tutankhamun. So runs the legend, written in gold at the dawn of history, in the only royal tomb left unrifled by robbers across the Nile from Luxor Temple at Thebes, the great capital of Egypt's ancient warrior kings. Forget, as the Pict's magic carpet carries you to the dawn of Egypt, that those wonders, the pyramids, ever existed. Abandon the eternal riddle that the Sphinx has thrown down through the tens of centuries that elapsed before this rock-carved temple of Abu Simbel was ever discovered. But bypass even this miracle of achievement to visit the west bank of the Nile at Thebes, where ancient Egypt has been brought back to vivid life, the Valley of Kings. Here, 70 generations of pharaohs were buried, with treasures for their use in the afterlife. And here, 700 generations of tomb robbers have been busy stealing priceless jewels, even from sepulchres well guarded and concealed. The whole story of Seti, the great fighting pharaoh, is pictured and written in this tomb of his, which, with its hidden traps against robbers, reaches 400 feet down under the very heart of the Theban hills. But the jewels were gone and the mummy missing when the first archaeologist found it. Across the hills to the east, the pharaoh's courtiers had less pretentious tombs, still with wall drawings depicting those scenes from their life that they hoped to resume in life after death. Here, a great state officer was entombed amid painted memories meant to placate Osiris when that god of the dead weighed his heart in judgment. His daughter goes wildfowling with him and sees he doesn't fall in. He's quite a huntsman and he likes a party. Nacht is his name, high overseer of Pharaoh's granaries, and he reckons those dancing girls are too lovely to be looked at by the slave who plays their music. So the harpist is blind. It's from tomb pictures and temple inscriptions like those on the all-powerful Queen Hatshepsut's temple facing the river that Egyptologists have built up a detailed, even an intimate picture of life 1,500 years before Christ. Hatshepsut's powerful queen was the reputed daughter of Amun, the sun god. Among these monuments you can read her boast, "To gild them I have given gold by the bushel as though it were sacks of grain." But it isn't for Hatshepsut's temple that we bypassed both Sphinx and Pyramid. The colossi of Memnon, great giant carvings, take your breath away. But even these are not our chief reason for fetching our magic carpet to Thebes, though pause we must here, near the sacred lake. Here, in the mortuary temple of all-powerful Ramesses, was a statue over 1,000 tons in weight, the biggest in the kingdom, destroyed, it is said, by a Persian king when the might of the pharaohs was no more. The Ramesseum is west of the river. In ancient Egypt, Westerners were dead men, and it was to their Western tombs here that the great men took precious belongings and their recorded memories, all too often to be obliterated, in the Valley of Kings. Here's what we've come to see, the tomb of Tutankhamun, the one royal resting place unopened from the day 3,000 years ago when the young queen, Ankhesenamun, stood by her husband's gold coffin and laid a last bunch of flowers there. Never seen again until this very guard with an English archaeologist, Howard Carter, broke the seal and picked up those shriveled flowers. The boy king still lies there, where he was found 40 years ago, in the silent heart of the mountain, surrounded by the paintings that depict him mourned by his minister and meeting his legendary ancestors, first Nut, the goddess of the sky, who would escort him to the underworld and the happy afterlife he hoped for with Osiris, king of the dead. You can conjure up the scene when Carter first peered into the tomb and saw strange animals, statues, and gold, gold, gold. The wrought gold coffin figure is polished like a mirror. This gilded warrior put to guard the burial chamber. The young king's golden throne embellished with precious stones and silver inlays. On it you'll see him with his queen in the garden where Aten, the sun disk, sends down his magic rays. Never had modern man stumbled across such treasures, buried since antiquity and preserved in the dry white limestone of the tomb. It took meticulous experts 10 seasons to list, examine and preserve the contents of this unique tomb. From such pictures of the king fighting in Asia, the crumbled remains of his chariot were renovated and reassembled with all its original adornments. And these are the treasures of just one of the younger, obscure and unimportant pharaohs who lived and died long before Greece had been born, ages before Rome had even been conceived. In the Egyptian Museum at Cairo, his caskets, his gold-embellished stools and alabaster vases are now on display, ancient wonders in a modern city, which in 100 ways brings the fascination of the pharaohs right into the 20th century. You can fly by jet aircraft to the pyramids. You can see the Sphinx lit by the rising sun or dramatized by floodlight. You can take a taxi to Tutankhamun's incredible treasure trove. You can look out on the great river of history, in silence, for you can almost hear Get, the earth god, saying to that boy king, "Thy name is in the mouth of the people, thy stability in the mouth of the living. Thou smellest the air and goest out as a god."